Okay, I think we'll probably get started with our panel discussion. And my name is Mark Gallimore. I'm the director for the Center for Online Learning and Innovation, which is my dinner party explanation is I help faculty use the internet. I'm actually trained as an academic historian. My degrees are all in history, which sort of I bring things to that job. One is that all technology is politics, and so that's how I'm approaching AI as well. Welcome to Canisius University. We're so proud that we've made the switch. Many of you are at institutions that are also making a similar move. No sooner do we make this historic move than we're faced with a new challenge. Large language model AI and its implications for our enterprise. And for those of you who are from K-12 or from enterprises other than education, you're sort of facing the same quandary, the sense of possibility, but also maybe the sense of peril. So we'll discuss that tonight. I'm going to let the panel introduce themselves, and I'm going to do that sort of by way of getting our conversation started. Before I do that, at any time, please get up and partake of refreshments at the back. Once the panel discussion is concluded, once we've exhausted our panelists, please stay for some cross currents and cross conversations between our different institutions and fields. Okay, so I'm going to start on one end. Dr. David Sheets, what brings you to the AI sphere?
Hi, good evening. I'm Dave Sheets, Director of the Data Analytics Program here at Canisius and the Data Science Undergraduate Program. Thanks, Mark. One more thing I want to say that, Mark, if you have questions you want to pose to the panel, please stick up a hand and we'll get you in there. We got a list of probably more questions we're going to be able to answer tonight, but please, ask questions. This is meant to be participation.
Absolutely.
Up a little more? Yeah. I've been building models for a long time. I was trained as a physicist, but really a lot of that was concentrated on mathematical models. So how do models work? How do you form them? How do you evaluate them? What do you do with them? How do they work? And so that's really the type of thing that I'm fundamentally interested in is how things work, and particularly using models to do that. When we started the data analytics program here, I shifted over from physics into data analytics, and these days I really do data science. I build and use AI-based models. I've used them in forensics, and I've used them in some art history applications. So I've started to use these models at this point in my own professional work. It's a tremendous amount of fun. So I'll go ahead and let my colleague Joaquin go ahead.
Thanks, Dave. My name is Joaquin Carbonara. I'm the director of the graduate program in data science at SUNY Buffalo State University as well. And I'm originally from Venezuela. I've gone to school in Italy and the United States. My background is a PhD in combinatorial and algorithmic mathematics. So I always looked at the world as an algorithm, and I was very, very pleased that the way all these years that finally algorithms is on the front stage. Large language models and artificial intelligence is driven by algorithms, and I am interested in the properties of these machine learning and artificial intelligence models as a way to take decisions. I never kind of felt very, very close to analytic models where they tell you what things are. I always thought that the way to approach things is to know what to do, and so I welcome the new tools available, and I've been working in machine learning and data science, in particular looking at data. Data as a way of record of everything we do and to improve our mathematics. So that's more or less my angle on this.
Okay.
You actually have almost pretty close. I am Justin Delvecchio. I am PhD in computer science. I teach cybersecurity here. I'm the director of the cybersecurity program, but I also work and teach computer science as well. I came to Canisius full-time as faculty in the fall of 2022, and prior to that, I worked in industry as a software engineer and developer for 20 years. 17 of those years I worked at a local company called Kubrick, if you know them. And what a time to come into computer science. I was familiar with ChatGPT and what it was able to do leading into its release in November. And I do demonstrations of this for other people, and I came up with a demonstration where I asked it to the 2.5 version, which is before what got released in November of 2022. I said, tell me who wrote the Pledge of Allegiance. And it gave you like an answer. And you read it and you go, it's completely wrong, but boy, it's on to something. It's like something's there. And then you ask ChatGPT 3.5 the exact same question, and it gives you 5 different versions of the answer, and they're all spot on. And when it was released in November and December of 2022, I took my textbook that I was going to teach in the spring, and I handed it to the student who was going to help me with the lab, and I said, go through the first 2 chapters and see what questions it can answer at the end of the book. And he came back an hour later and he said he answered every single one of them. And I said, oh, wow, this is awesome. I'm like, now I have to teach the students what's going to happen in their lives, it's like in their careers, because we're like in the warm-ups of like a baseball game right now, and we haven't even entered the first inning of the baseball game yet with what's going to happen. And they're right at the cutting edge, these people, these students that I'm teaching. So it's a terrific opportunity to expose the students, but also to correspond with the people that I still know in the industry and see how they are embracing it. And they indeed are embracing it. They're doing it in a variety of different ways. The panels that we're going to hold over the next few weeks are going to bring people from industry in who are going to explain what they're doing. It's a really neat technology, and the last thing I will say about it is it's a tool. It's something that people can use. It's not smart on its own. It's only smart because people tell it what to do and guide it and instruct it on what you want it to do. And if you're really, really good at researching and asking critical questions, it can do like amazing things. And I look forward to this discussion.
Did we decide I do need to push a button? Is that on?
You gotta push it up.
Okay.
There you go.
There you go.
My name is Graham Stowe. I am a professor in the English department and director of the Writing Center and director of first year writing, and I don't do computer science. But I have, I'm interested in this stuff partly because I think some of it's fun, but mostly because I teach writing, and I want my students to continue going through the writing process and to not skip over steps that help them learn critical thinking skills. And so I have some skepticism about certainly where things are now, and I don't know whatever happens next is what happens next, but like Justin said, I'm interested in the way it can ultimately be used as a tool, but I don't want it to become a thing that students rely on as a thing that writes their papers, because it'll write a not terrible freshman English paper if you ask it to. But I don't want it to students to bypass the process of writing a paper, because writing is a kind of thinking, and students need to develop that kind of thinking. And I don't think writing is going to go away.
So I think as most of us encounter these large language model AIs, we're really talking, ChatGPT stole the headlines almost a year ago, it seems, and there's some other ones too. I have, and afterwards, if you'd like to grab a brownie and have a conversation, GPT-4 is open on screen. In front of it right now is Claude 2, which is Anthropic's product. But in talking about these sort of consumer-facing large language model AIs, maybe we ought to start and say, what is going on when you prompt them? How do they work? And so I guess I'm going to once more start on this end of the panel.
Thanks, Mark. So these are part of a tradition that is called natural language processing, right, of natural language. This has been going on for quite a while within the computer science communities. It is making use of neural net technology. We've seen that's having a large impact. It's actually making use of a lot of fairly traditional data science tactics the breakthrough really that we've seen that's driving the GPT and the large language models is a clever way to embed or store language. That turned out to be the breakthrough. It's a concept called attention that allows a computer system to infer what the meanings of words are and how to map or embed words based on their meaning, not on the word itself. So the classic example that you see in the literature a lot is the word flies, right? Flies could be a number of different things, right? It could be a noun or a verb. He's good at catching pop flies. You immediately know what I'm talking about. Fruit flies like bananas. Time really seems to fly, right? Those are all different words, uses of that word that have very different meanings. The use of this concept called attention, which is make use of the other words in the sentence to figure out what that means, because that's what we all just did, right? When you heard, he's good at catching, you know that flies is referring to a baseball game. And when I said bananas, flies like bananas, you know what I'm talking about, right? Exactly what I didn't say. So the key words in the sentence that tell you what it means. The clever part was figuring out how to build an idea called attention and allow AIs to figure out how to use attention to figure out what words mean and to produce a map, really, of where words belong, a thing called an embedding, which is common in a lot of mathematics and computer science. And then once you've got that embedding, you can do a whole bunch of things with it. You can embed two languages together and build a translator out of it. So this makes nice translators. You can use it to predict missing words in text. That's often how these things are trained, is trained on a relatively simple test. They can imitate a human in a conversation. So that's what ChatGPT is doing, is wandering its way around through this embedding and picking up patterns of common word usage. So that's what it's doing. It doesn't have any idea about meaning, truth, validity, citation, any of that. It's using, turns out to be a thermodynamic model, so suddenly we're back in physics, my home turf there, but they use thermodynamic models to build patterns of drift through the patterns in words. And so the idea of hallucinations that you see, if you've seen that in them, where there's an absolute falsehoods coming out of these, plausible sounding falsehoods, but so that's what they're doing. They are kind of wandering through this very clever way of mapping language onto mathematics and generating a response. And the goal was to make it seem like you're talking to a human or reading human-generated text. So be aware, that doesn't mean to tell the truth, to be valid, to do anything else, but to just sound like a human, right? We've all run into people who have an answer for everything, right? Everybody know that somewhere in life, right? You got to worry about those people, right? You got to worry about these tools. So that's really what's going on. There was this beautiful, clever idea of attention, and after that, it's really actually some pretty standard, simple stuff, coupled with massive training sets, right? All AI relies on training sets. The more data you can feed into an AI, the better it does. And so there's a lot of time and money spent developing some large data sets, and that's really kind of the key to the breakthrough, is the massive size of some of these data sets. I'll let somebody else follow up.
Yeah, and I worked on systems that were quote-unquote expert systems, where you try to get context of words and understand, like a new verb you hadn't seen, and try to understand it from the context of other words that surrounded it in a sentence. But I worked on that manually, by hand, and hand encoded the rules. I created what was called an expert system. And those were very difficult to maintain and not realistic solutions. They proved that you could do it, and the breakthrough with the machine learning approaches is it just learns all the different combinations that we would try to encode by hand, of all the different ways that context of words around, for example, a verb, let you know what that verb is actually talking about. The other item I want to mention is that the training data sets are really important. You have to have really good data sets that are representative of topics that you're interested in. If you read about ChatGPT and what it's been trained on, they won't tell you exactly what it is, but they'll allude to it. And one of the things that it was trained on and used is something called Common Crawl, which is an index of the entire internet that is churned out every month. So some folks I think it was a person from Google, who left Google and said it's unfair that Google indexes the entire internet and researchers don't have access to it. He created this project called Common Crawl that basically every page you can touch on the internet, it goes and accesses every one of those pages, and that is one of the sources that these models were trained on. And the volume of models that are out there now, are just, I don't want to say mind-boggling, but there's a lot of them. There's a lot of different ones that are being released. There's ones from ChatGPT, OpenAI, Microsoft uses the same model, Facebook Meta has released something called Llama, and the technique to develop these models is out there. If you really wanted to, and you had the computational horsepower, you could create your own large language model. It would cost a bit of money to do, but you could absolutely do it. So there's no real secret sauce here at this point. Anybody could do it if you have like a large enough horsepower, computational horsepower to make it happen.
Yeah, I wanted to add to what's already been said here, a few comments about what truth is in the first place. We are used to having a set of beliefs that we take for granted, right? And then there is misinformation, there is right information. And then mathematics, that is my background, that is much clearer. In mathematics, everything is based on assumptions that are agreed upon, and then you have the things that derive from it. Now, ChatGPT, of course, is not looking at what things are. It doesn't have a theory behind. It's just an algorithm. It's just a way of proceeding, so one step after another. And so that is basically what explains the fact that it may hallucinate, but it's not really a hallucination. It's simply part of the algorithm. It follows the rules that it was designed to do. And now, it is very common for every new piece of technology to look like magic and look like that it's alive, and this is a very common thing. So if anybody from 50 years ago would see one of our smartphones, he would think that we're doing magic, that we are wizards of some sort. So I think that one of the things that is wonderful about these changes and this revolution is that it's making people think again about what truth is and what language means, and there is a number of really interesting works out there. For instance, Stephen Pinker, the language instincts. How it's a great book that talks about how humans have developed language and how it works. I honestly, right now, it's almost like I program myself the way I program ChatGPT. It's like, I don't know how much you've played with it, but there is a number of really interesting ways of doing it. You can tell ChatGPT, I'm going to ask you to do a task, but I want you to think of questions that would simplify the task. Maybe 5, 6, 7 more questions. You think of it, ChatGPT. You answer those questions, then put it all together and give me back the answer. So it's almost the kind of thing that I would tell myself, okay, I'm going to do something, but why don't I break it down into steps? The other thing is that what Dave talked about, and as well in computer science, we're talking about an algorithm as a way of doing things. They had no idea that ChatGPT was going to come out this good. I've talked a lot with people that have worked high level in these projects, and they had no idea that it was going to do what it's supposed to do. And so even Lemoyne, that was in the papers, that wanted to get a lawyer to protect what was the name of that model? Google had a language model, and Lemoyne, he thought that it was alive, that it had happened, that they created something, so he tried to find a lawyer to protect it. And then he was fired from Google. This happened maybe a year ago. Mm-hmm. But so, in any case, nobody knows where this is going, and we don't know if we are at the end of the curve or at the beginning of the curve. If we are at the beginning of the growth curve, we're in trouble, because it is already amazingly good as it is. Yeah. And but from the point of view of the philosophical part of it, trying to define it is a paradox in itself, because actually I am against defining things. Every time you create a definition, it's static, and definitions and is what has created a lot of the bias in this world. I mean, you see 5 examples of something and then immediately generalize it, and that's exactly what we are trying to get away from and ChatGPT is definitely a step in that direction. So, anything.
So do you? I guess we're all sort of wondering when we just see now that there's, especially in education, but in a lot of other fields too, this will change everything. Is that overstated to some degree, or do you think that at least in some sectors we're going to see profound change in how jobs are done, or how across business, healthcare, government?
Why don't we toss it to Justin? I think you've done more in that area than maybe.
Yeah. So I think about it in a lot of different ways. I come at it from how I worked in industry before. And when I programmed full time, I was a really good programmer, and I could do stuff, but I had to always consult Google to find answers to questions. And I had to ask my colleagues how to do things. And over the years, I became a manager, and I was less proficient with understanding how to actually do the day-to-day of programming. I still knew all the key concepts of how to do it. The second that this came out, I was like, oh, wow. Here are, and I already have this. I've already realized this. This is not still like a figment of my imagination. Like, I have these research ideas, but I just don't have the time to write the code to do it. And I don't have the patience to search Google and find and weave my way through the 5 different articles and piece it all together and get to the end for a problem that I'm trying to tackle. I just go to ChatGPT and I ask it to do stuff, and it does it. And for me personally, for the code that I write, I would say that at this point, 95% of it, it's generating for me, and it's doing it much faster, and I'm getting things done incredibly fast. And I think back to other programmers that I know, and I'm like, oh yeah, they could really benefit from this. We have our industry panels that are coming up, and we will talk to people in coming weeks. We'll describe this in more detail, but you can get stuff done so much faster. I mean, you can realize ideas. I had this idea where somebody had published a PDF of all the events in the Ukraine-Russian war dating back to 2014. And it was a big PDF. It was 279 pages long. And they did this great job where they had a Word document and they busted it out into date, description of event, URL at the end with more information about event. Old Justin would be like, boy, I wish I could get a Python script to go through there and turn those into discrete events that I could put in the CSV and then harvest all the URLs, and then I could go out on the internet and I could grab all those documents. I could create this great data store with all this information in it. Could never have done it. Once ChatGPT came along, I am at a point where I have that CSV file and I have all the URLs and I have all the PDFs, and now I'm like, oh, the next thing I need to do is just get all of the HTML pages for this. Oh, and then I'm going to open source how I actually did this. And now I'm going to create like a QA agent in front of it, so anybody out there can go and download all these documents and have their own QA system and learn more about the conflict between the Ukraine and Russia, because I was interested in like the cyber events, and I started learning stuff. And I'm like, I could not have done this like 8 months ago. And I was like, oh wow. And then I talked to other people who are doing similar things. And they're like, yeah, I have these ideas for things I want to do, and it just tells me how to do it. Is it perfect with what it gives me as far as code goes? No. Other people call these hallucinations. Sometimes it gets stuff like wrong, like it makes up libraries that don't exist. But because I'm a programmer, I understand what it's getting at, and I'm like, oh, you probably mean something like this probably exists. So I'll go to like the library that it's talking about. I'll be like, I bet you meant this. And then I'll be like, oh, you're right, I'm wrong. And I can tell that this thing is like, I use Anthropic now because it's one that knows the most recent stuff. And it's like, I can tell that it's like learning stuff. It's like, oh yeah, you're right. I gotta like change the way that I think about this. I'm like, whatever. You got me most of the way there, and you saved me a lot of time. So I think it's gonna change that. And from an educator perspective, it's been really interesting to see how the students react to it. I know that like writing is a critical skill. It's its own mindset, how to teach people to write effectively and do a really good job. People think like, oh, you're in computer science, you don't do a lot of writing. But in fact, for cybersecurity, we have them doing a lot of writing because there's a lot of writing of reports, like after action reports about what happened. So there's that angle of it where it can help you with the writing. But from the coding perspective, could you just hand it to introductory students and expect them to like start knocking it out of the park? that really hasn't been the case because they don't understand the underlying concepts. So there's still this critical skill they need to understand about how computer programs work before they can actually start issuing like natural language commands saying, go and develop me a program that does this. Because they can develop code, but if it doesn't work, they won't understand why it doesn't work. So I unveiled it to the students at the beginning of the spring semester, and I said, go ahead and just use it. And a lot of them just didn't use it. They preferred to have hands-on work in the labs with me. But then they would always be proud when they reached the point where they said, but at this point, I knew to ask ChatGPT how to do it, because I basically didn't want to figure this part out. I knew essentially what I needed to do, but I knew it would tell me what the code is. And I was like, yeah, that's pretty much how you should use it. You should do the parts that you want to do yourself, and then the parts where it can fill in the details, or maybe explain a concept you don't fully understand, go for it. So yeah, it's going to change a lot. Industry and educator side.
I said, in regards to using it in the classroom, last spring I did, our program is data analytics across disciplines. So I have students that have a PhD in biology. I had a medical student, people from the fashion technology, and they have very weak coding skills. They may understand coding, but they don't have the expertise, the practice. I mean, coding is like playing an instrument. It takes years to get good at it. And then I thought, hey, these guys are the perfect audience. They're going to love this. It's going to fix my program. It's going to be amazing. Well, it didn't work that well because they didn't know how to prompt ChatGPT. So now I've worked a lot more, and I'm going to start by telling them how to prompt ChatGPT and how to test. So you need to know how to talk to it if you want to. So I think that
prompt engineering. I think that's the term we keep hearing. Prompt engineering. Yeah.
So there are Coursera courses, and which I just did one, and there is a whole bunch of there is one by the guy from UCLA, the really high-end mathematician, and the one he gives, this prompt engineering, is only for APIs. So if you're going to do a ChatGPT with APIs, it's going to cost you about $10 a day. I mean, if you do it extensively. So the ChatGPT 4 is $20 a month, which is the one I use. So there is a lot more than people have seen. I mean, it's like there is a book on in Amazon. You can look how to become a millionaire with ChatGPT, and you can Google it. And so there is.
Does that circle us back to hype?
Yeah, I don't know if I believe it. Now I see these Indeed job postings like $400,000 if you know how to do stuff like ChatGPT and you can be like a prompt engineer type. I've seen some of those. I'm like, I don't know if those are legit or not. But yeah, I mean, it's
It's interesting you don't like definitions. I love definitions. I think it's just a different tradition. Rhetoricians think about definitions all the time. It's what we do. And so, I love the idea that this is going to make a lot of day-to-day life, like tedious work, like the stuff where you're typing the same line of code in 600 times. That seems great. I don't mind if my lawyer uses ChatGPT to write up my mortgage paperwork. Like that feels like something that would be mostly useful, as long as they proofread it. I don't want to sign something. But I think one of the question that this leads me to, from what Justin and Joaquin both said, is how are we thinking about education at all?
Yeah.
So how are we defining what it means to educate people? Is it about, I mean, this is a question that comes up all the time. Is it about a certain skill set, or is it about a way of thinking? I tend to land on the way of thinking side, and I've been struck recently by this idea that we've sort of culturally we have, and I don't mean this as any one particular person in the room, but we have over the years started to look down on vocational schools. This is changing actually in recent years, but over the years, like it was looked at as not as good a move as going to college, and simultaneously we've turned much of college into vocational work, and training, and learning a set of skills to do a thing to go out into a particular field. And so I'm troubled by that too. Like I think that there's something important about curricula and figuring out how to do things that will help you figure out how to write a thesis statement about The Great Gatsby. And also, I also think that that'll probably help you learn how to talk to ChatGPT. That kind
Absolutely.
of, like, coming up with those kinds of critical skills that will say, oh, I'm not going to invent a thesis about Gatsby right here. But that kind of thing will then lead to the same kind of critical thinking that, and my biggest concern, though, is that that students will skip to trying to be expert too quickly.
Yes, exactly.
Picasso didn't start off as a cubist. Like, he could paint. And then he could paint when he was a cubist too. But he moved toward, after knowing a lot of basic skills, then moving to that kind of abstract work. It's why, I was talking to a friend yesterday, it's why when you meet a young musician who tries to do something way out there to play like John Coltrane did, that you don't like it. It's because they haven't learned how to play Mary Had a Little Lamb yet.
That's a really good point.
Actually, there is a book, Scary Smart by Mo Goddard. Has anybody read it here by any chance? He looks at ChatGPT very similar to how you're looking at, Graham. He thinks that ChatGPT will continue to learn from us. So he says, when you use ChatGPT, do right, please do this. And it's like a child, and the way you treat it, it will treat you back. And actually, and he says, if you're getting the wrong ads, maybe you're clicking the wrong places. So you are training the AI tools to behave like they behave. So his approach is not crazy. I think that at first I thought this is a little bit outlandish, but he has an extensive background, really, really knowledgeable. And I was very impressed about the ethical angle that he did in the last 3 chapters of Scary Smart. And so that is something to keep in mind, I think.
Can I ask, how many people have ChatGPT accounts in here? Wow. How many people use it every day? How many people use it like once a week? Okay. And last question. How many people find it useful?
What do you use it for?
Yeah.
You raised your hand first. You had a surprise later.
So I actually use it to train, like print on demand, to make art descriptions, all sorts of things, list products.
Yeah.
But I also say, like, I have these items in my kitchen. Can you give me a recipe?
Oh, yeah.
I
Yep.
use it for like everything.
Yeah.
You want to say 50 more?
I've fed it, I use it several things. I've done the recipe thing, I've done entire dinner parties with ChatGPT. It was really great. I've created poems for family members. I've done things that are more on the creative side. But what I did to find out the test of the work that we do, I'm in educational leadership and supervision.
Okay.
And I wanted to see if our students, who are all adults, highly motivated adults, very successful professionals, fed in the prompts that we give them as both the capstone activities and things leading up to the capstone, how well would ChatGPT, even with the regenerate function, do with those. And ChatGPT did very, very well. So my question, because I was also looking at the citations, and the citations it was using were ones that were current and pretty powerful.
Yeah.
So my question is more about from the practitioners, because we're training people to be leaders in K through 12, and how do boards establish policy? How do we capture the benefits of it? Because it's in our students' hands, and they'll become more highly proficient in its use than many of their teachers will be, because they'll just persist with it. And I think the reality is that it's here, but I also would love to hear advice in terms of its use and cautions. And I've heard what you've said about like a master editor function to know whether or not things are accurate or not. But what other concerns should educators have?
Have immediate advice. Write poems for your family yourself. And I know you're probably doing it for fun and all that, but also, there's some kind of truth in like speaking from the heart to people, right? And I know that I'm not picking on you. I made it write a Billy Joel song, and it did okay. Changed the story of Piano Man to the relationship between two men. It was fascinating.
Yeah, let's go with another one. Yeah.
So my position, I'm in higher education. I'm the head of academic affairs, and so I've been using it over the past month quite a bit. One example is we're trying to improve our nursing outcomes, and so I, put in your nursing program director. These are your NCLEX scores. Whatever. Gave it some parameters and what are some best practices to improve our outcomes. And it gave me some great information. It gave me great sources that I was able to quickly go to and really kind of pull some information together very quickly. So that was one use. We also have been, my colleague Michelle, we work on updating curriculum. So and looking at what's current, what are employers looking for in terms of a certain degree or in a program student learning outcomes. And so we've plug that in, again, giving it the correct prompts that you are, this is an associate degree program, 60 credits, whatever, technical college, those sorts of things. And you have to, kind of go through it. You have to proofread it because it's not 100% accurate, but it gives you a really good starting spot.
Yeah, right.
But then you have to have the knowledge to know what's useful and what's not. I also know that some faculty have been using it for lesson planning quite a bit, putting in the outcomes that they want their students to achieve on a given day, and it's really given some great active learning ideas. So I think we're sort of just playing with it, but it's proving very useful.
Yeah, that idea of getting to 80 or 95% of that first draft, is really, it does that, right? It does a nice job on that, particularly if it's not a really arcane task, or at least it's a task, maybe an arcane task that you've got an AI that's been trained on arcane material, specialized. But that's it. If it gets you to that 85% or 90% of what you want, there's that first draft, and then you need somebody who's capable and who really knows how to write, to finish that off. But that's a big time saving.
What you're writing, though. I mean, a lesson plan, great. Those are a biggest part of your job as an educator. But I don't want a high school sophomore to skip to the 85th percent of their essay about the green light and the great badge.
Yep.
Can I just make one more comment? That's what I struggle with.
Yeah.
So at what point do you introduce students to ChatGPT?
You don't have to
Because you want them to learn these skills, but you don't want to turn a blind eye because they're going to figure it out. And I think it's finding the sweet spot of teaching them at what point and how to appropriately use it. I don't have the answers to that, but that's what I struggle with.
Actually, one technique that I use is try to compare and contrast with other tools. I think of the regular computing calculators to be are left brain calculators. And in mathematics, we've been dealing with them for many, many years. So there was all this issue about should you let students use calculators to do everything by hand, and this and the other. And truthfully, I think that the ChatGPTs and large language models are right brain calculators. So once you start to compare, like when do you let students use calculators? When do you let students use ChatGPT? In my case, English is not my first language, and it has been a blessing because now when I write something and I tell it what I want to write, it is reading my mind. It reads my mind and writes exactly what I meant to say, and I fix it. And it's really, really useful. Then also, I took 7 papers in one topic that I have. I uploaded the PDF. I said, I think I should make a book with this. He said, oh, certainly. Immediately gave me the title of the book, the abstract of the book, and the chapters of the book. And then I just have to fill in the details. And it's really a right brain calculator. The thing that, compare and contrast. I just came from Rwanda. In Rwanda, people in bicycles with sandals and no helmet go up a hill with 100 gallons of water. when is the last time you saw something like that here? Make it beers, because here people don't drive. But it's like we are losing our ability to use our bodies. If you go, like in Rwanda in particular, is very very natural. It's like many places they don't have electricity and water, and that their body can handle it. Here, people, we are so spoiled by everything that we are losing our abilities. And ChatGPT certainly is going to do that. There's no way around it, because I mean, once you start using it, I use it all day long. I have it open and I do it for everything from cooking. I mean, I'm vegan, and I say, give me a vegan cheese recipe. It's the best recipe I've got. And it talks in my language and my level. I mean, when I talk to people, they sometimes are too smart or too simple for me. ChatGPT always is in the right spot. Whatever it explains to me, I seem to get it.
So, in speaking of some of the concerns we have about ChatGPT and Claude as well, two other things come up that me as staring down the barrel of a history class I got to teach starting in August 31st. We're hearing a lot about the potential for bias in what ChatGPT gives back or gives back to our students, and what may they be tempted to normalize or be sort of subtly encouraged to normalize. So what's the technical basis for this concern over bias, which data scientists seem to share? Like so where's bias come from in these things?
So with all these systems, they're only as good as the training data. That's the key on all of this, right? The performance of machine learning tools is based on the training data. And sometimes when I use them, I don't even bother to optimize the performance of the model. If I get good enough data, it doesn't really matter, right? In fact, the model performance can be a little off, and I still get really good results out of it, because it's the data that matters. When we look at historical data in our world, we know we've got gender and racial bias in virtually all economic data. Okay?
Institutional is, I think, the term we've used frequently.
Yeah. And so that's there. And so you're going to have to make a conscious effort to figure out how to get that out of your training data. And that's a huge, huge problem, right? That is a huge amount of work. So to go in and try to think about it, how do you extract and recognize and pull all that out is a real problem for a data scientist, because it's not in the algorithm, right? My algorithm is nice and clean. My code has got no bias in it, right? It doesn't care. It doesn't know anything about race or gender. It's not trying to go either direction. But you dump in a whole bunch of training data that's from American history or world history, and suddenly you've got a whole bunch of reflection of bias in there. And so it's that training corpus, the body that you're training it on, that's going to determine it. There was a case, one of these early systems got released on a kind of a chat channel. Do you guys remember this? I don't even know what that instance was. They actually had to take they had to pull it back,
yes,
because it was learning so much offensive material.
Right.
Yeah, it
Twitter
was taking
became
on.
a Nazi within 12 hours.
Yes.
Yeah, it was good at that. That was prevalent in its stream, and it picked it right up and reflected it back at you. Yeah.
Yeah. So when I did the Pledge of Allegiance example, I thought about it, and I said, you can't possibly rewrite ChatGPT. There has to be other Pledge of Allegiances out there. And it said, well, yes, of course. India has one, Singapore has one, the Philippines have one. I'm like, well, why did you answer with the United States one? And I looked at, and there's a way, I was using the API, so I could look at like the top 5, I said, give me 5 different replies, and all of them were the ones for the U.S. Pledge of Allegiance, and it's because it's the prevalence of what it's been trained on. But there's other ones out there, so I'm like, why wouldn't it go to the other ones? But that would lead to, I'm just thinking about this now, but that would lead to a situation where it would have to stop and self-reflect and say, well, what do you mean by this? And really think about what you're asking and say, there's lots of different options here, lots of different ways I can answer this question. Which one do you want? And I've never really had it stop me and say, well, what do you mean? Which type do you mean? Sometimes if I ask it something about like programming library, it'll be like, I don't know exactly what you're saying, so I'm going to guess you're talking about this, and then it'll go down that route. But it never really comes back and asks me to like.
You have to train it to do that.
You have to train it to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, you say every time I tell you something, then prompt me in the way you want to and the format you want to. so that it can be more specific.
Got it.
Yeah.
A lot of the software did come out of surprisingly small groups. That's the other thing to be aware of. And a lot of the developers have a bias toward white and Asian males, okay? Not from Indian and Asian continent males. The one big issue you may have seen is the discussion of facial recognition software. Again, developed by white and Indian and Chinese male engineers. And they collected data to train their systems. So they went to all their friends and got photos of their friends, right? So it was predominantly white and Asian and Indian males. And so it did not do well with people of other color or women of color, particularly, right? There's Joy Boulware, if you look up her work at some point, big discussion of this. And some of the companies were good and responsive about this, and others, were not. But there was no intent to be biased there. But it was small groups of people, and they were acting with data of convenience. In other words, the data that was at hand.
Yeah.
And so we have to be worried about that, because when you do something like that, you have to think about that. You say, oh yeah, I know I trained this on a biased set. Before we release this commercially, it has to be fixed. But a lot of this stuff is happening from very small companies, right? So there is not great representation. OpenAI, who's ChatGPT, had 250 employees at the time they released it. That's the entire company. Not the scientific part of it, that's the whole company. So you're maybe talking about, I don't know, how many people on the scientific development team? 50 to 100? Yeah.
And they all got a bonus of $900,000 at the end of this year.
I think we had a question. Yeah.
It was just a comment. So I work in the creator economy, and I help a lot of creators use these tools. And we haven't talked about Midjourney yet or any of that kind of AI stuff. But I think what's really interesting is, we were talking about text prompting, and that's a lot of stuff I do with these creators. And a lot of them, are international and developing countries and that kind of, and they're really hungry for this. They're really hungry to create content, play in global economies, all that stuff. And there is bias, of course, we all know that, but we're also we're democratizing a lot of this technology, and we're allowing people to almost make up that lost time in ways, where representation can quickly be outputted based on the text prompts you are feeding in. So that's just been an interesting feedback that I thought I would share.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I think most of this original material is open source, so anybody can take it and retrain it. And there are costs to that, electrical costs to it, but it's really not that hard. Justin and I have both, gone ahead and done this with, really modest amounts of resources. So yeah, parts of, there's this huge democratization because of this, no doubt about that. What are we doing on time, Mark?
I figure a few more minutes. I want to get in the question about, because as a historian, I share some of Graham's concerns, but I'm fascinated by the hallucination problem. So, because I think that's something I have to discuss with my students. I can pretty reliably get it to hallucinate about things in the past that were not things in the past. That it'll invent people, and I've had my fun. I asked it if it had a message for the action man, like David Bowie, and it was creative and things like that. But I am concerned, especially as we're in an environment of misinformation, disinformation, and we've seen the wages of this over the last 10 years in many different areas. Can they solve the hallucination problem? Do you think? Do you think it's obviously in some areas it doesn't matter if you're asking it for general advice on cooking, or give me 5 restaurants and, okay, one doesn't exist. Well, the other 4 look nice, kind of thing. The stakes are low. But I'm concerned about the potential for hallucination to be stubbornly persistent.
If you haven't seen this happen, one thing that it can do that is so strangely specific is the Writing Center studies world is pretty small. We all know each other. And I saw it create an article by one of the most well-known Writing Center specialists, and they shared it on the listserv, and she immediately wrote, no, I didn't write that, but it was plausibly sounded like her kind of work. And so it can do these very strange, create a title of an article that was published in the right journal at the right time of her career, like, it's baffling.
Yeah.
And I will say mind-boggling. Justin doesn't want to, but I will say mind-boggling.
Yeah, you know, and that really is this idea of what it's really good at is recreating variations on patterns of writing it's seen before. That's really what it's good at. So if you ask it a question that it really hasn't seen very well, it doesn't have a lot of available source material to work with, and it kind of wanders off in strange directions.
It's worth pointing out that all the Writing Center journals are open source and available into the models.
Yeah. So, and you can, there is a thing called a temperature parameter within these, right? Because I said it's an underlying thermodynamic drift models, right? Back into physics. But you can adjust the temperature, and that adjusts the extent of hallucination that you get out of these systems. So in other words, they're variable, right? There's a stochastic or randomized element in these things. And so one of the fun things is if you've got one of these that you've built and trained yourself, you go in there and turn the temperature up and watch it get stranger and stranger in its responses. But you see, they tend to be good on fairly stereotypical actions. So writing basic business communications, writing lesson plans where there's like, if there are a lot of lesson plans out on the internet, it knows how to do that well, and then you just fine tune them. So that's part of what's going on. This is part of the nature of how it works.
Maybe another point of view that could be addressed is the location or the place that ChatGPT has in the evolution of what we're doing. We are first we would use, say, on TVs only to watch things, then we go computers and we write things in the computer would do what we tell it. Now we are not telling the computer what to do, we are telling the computer how to learn. So that is part of the whole thing, that I mean the algorithm of what's happening there I think is more important than defining what it is. One of the things that I'm really excited about data science, I think that data science is going to do to science what science did to religion. And data science is really going to blow a lot of science concepts out of the water, because science is based on defining things. People is constantly trying to define things. But in real life, it's extremely difficult to define things, and data science now is taking a different approach. So we don't care about what things are, we care about the data and the features of the data. Now, how many features are there? Do they use? By features mean properties. Say, suppose you're defining a person, you say, well, the person is female, 35 years, that's 2 features. But imagine if somebody gave 1 billion features about you. How well would they be able to do it? Now, ChatGPT uses how many features?
I think 1.75 billion.
1.75 billion per item. So imagine how much it is inputting as data to begin with. And that's why it blows my mind how well it captures grammar. I mean, the grammar is outstanding. I mean, it explains things so beautifully. And
Yeah, it does.
So that is something that it doesn't have hallucinations about grammar. Grammar, it does it well.
That's true. It doesn't get things grammatically incorrect.
Yeah, because that's what it is meant to do.
Yeah.
So just like a calculator is not going to add things wrong, but if you input the wrong data, you're going to get the wrong output. And furthermore, if you require your math students to explain what they do, the calculator is not going to help. Similarly, if I ask my students, okay, I want you to explain what you submit. If they did it with ChatGPT, it takes 5 seconds to know that they haven't learned anything and their grade is going to go down.
I want to throw something into the grammar question. From a linguist's perspective, there is no such thing as right or wrong grammar. It has learned a particular standardized grammar that is, let's just use English as an example, American English as an example, that is a white American English. And so has its own kind of bias built into the way it's talking about.
But you can ask it to speak in as Shakespeare, or you can ask it to speak in any which way you want.
Okay.
I
think that may also lead to problems on its own. Like,
well,
if I ask it to speak in African American vernacular English, I'm stepping into some messy territory for the algorithm and for me.
Yeah, I agree, but it's all circular. I mean, if we want to stick to definitions, what is the definition of woman? What is the definition of man? A lot of people say, well, I don't want to be defined like other people. I want them to call me they. I want them to call me this. So basically what we're breaking away is from a mindset where we have definitions. We need to break away from preconceptions and definitions, which is all that we've been taught to do. So if I go to the classroom and I want them to just be a carbon copy of me, and then of course it's going to be, all my students are going to become completely biased. I have a view of a mathematician with a certain background. It's very difficult. But once you change that approach to approach where you are basically trial and error, and which is the way people learned for the last 100,000 years. It was just in the 20th century that the industrialized period started making things carbon copy of each other. But if you read like the Invention of Nature, where they describe the work of Humboldt in the 1700s, it was all trial and error, all discovery, it's very different than what we do now. And all of the illnesses that we have in society, bias, discrimination, and so on, are the one of the side effects, I think, of having preconceptions and trying to define things. Just my view. Yes.
Well, folks, we're coming to the end of our hour, and I want to just say a few things before we sort of break off and continue the conversation in different organization. This is the first of 4 symposia. The next one is on August 17th. We're going to be over in Old Main, which is the gigantic building with the bronze dome that very unfortunately has Churchill Tower in front of it. So it's not as visible from Main Street, but anyway, I'll send around a map to everyone who RSVP'd for this event, and I think the parking's a little closer to Old Main too. I strongly encourage you to stay, discuss with each other, discuss with our panel. I want to thank our panel for taking the time tonight, and I think it's been a great conversation, and I'd like to see it continue. I'll be here with ChatGPT and Claude too, but it sounds like a lot of you have already had conversations with the AI, so I don't think you need introductions. Remember, we've got refreshments in the back. Thank you.
We need to thank Mark as well. Mark and Tyler.
Yes. Tyler from Piatek, my colleague in Frontline Learning and Innovation.
These guys just took care of the mechanical parts of making this all happen, and so the rest of us really appreciate it.
Truly, if you need something done at Canisius, you can call Mark Allen.
Well, now call ChatGPT instead.
Yeah.